Welcome to ARCI's video meeting number 17. Here we are on the 18th of December, 2021. And it's hard to believe we've done this many of these meetings, but we're at number 17, and I'm pleased to say that we've got some great presentations today. And we're going to be hearing from some longtime presenters here, and we're going to be doing this next year only 5 times. You can see the dates there. We'll have one next month in January, and then we're going to do 4 more after that. And I think we've talked about this before, is there's just a lot of stuff going on in the summer, and so we've decided to do these meetings only when we have months where we don't do a swap meet. So those are the dates, and we welcome your feedback at that email address there. And please consider doing a presentation, and we'll poll the group later to see if you're interested, and just do a simple show and tell. That's a good way to share what you know about radios and share your passion. So we have simple rules here. Just stay on mute unless you're trying to ask a question or give a presentation. And what we do next is I turn it over to Matt, and he does a little introduction about what it means that these things are recorded and put on YouTube. And he'll also poll you to tell you about whether whether you are going to do a show and tell. Matt?
So as Tom said, we are on YouTube. So for the newcomers, please remember that everything that you say or share can potentially be seen by everyone on the internet. So keep that in mind. You probably don't want to include directions to your house or your phone number. A great place for stuff like that is the Zoom chat feature, and we use that during the meet to share that kind of information. I will also be sharing the link to register for next month's ARCI Zoom, and also the MARC meeting that happens tomorrow morning. With that, the main thing to keep in mind is that YouTube is very concerned about respecting copyright, and they have a tool that will detect copyrighted music. So if you're sharing a radio and you're doing a band scan and demonstrating how sensitive it is, please don't tune to music stations for very long, because the music will be detected and we'll get a copyright strike, and our YouTube will be forced down, or I'll have to re-edit it or something like that.
So our first section is going to be the presentations. We've got 3 of them lined up, and then after the presentations we do a show and tell section, and then we'll just talk a little bit about swap meet after that. And then if you have anything you want to sell or anything you're looking for, you can talk about it at that time. And then after we wrap all that up, we have an open session. So that's the order of events. And so what I will do now is introduce our first presenter, Joe Koester, who really needs no introduction because he's been involved with so many radio clubs, it's hard to count. He started several of them and has written dozens and dozens of articles for Radio Age and other publications. And today he's going to talk about wood cabinet restoration, and it's based on a Radio Age article, and going to tell us all about his techniques. So Joe, take it away.
My name is Joe Koester. I live in Crossville, Tennessee, and I go back to ARCI a long ways. Probably my first radio meet ever was in 1982, and I met Ralph Muckow, and the club president at the time was a fellow named Joe Willis. And Joe helped us, helped both myself and Jim Clark in Michigan to start the Mid-Atlantic Antique Radio Club and the Michigan Antique Radio Club. So I went to a number of ARCI meets after that, and rediscovered ARCI a few years ago, and glad I did. And Before I start this, I'd like to say that I want to thank Tom Zaczek very, very much. All the slides you're going to see, he provided. And he did a lot of work on them and made a beautiful presentation, something I never would have been capable of. But this article first appeared, we're going to do the two-parter here. This article first appeared in the June 2009 issue of Radio Age, and it was followed up in August of 2009 with part 2 on veneering and what have you, and we'll deal with that in January. So many thanks to Tom for all the work that he put in on this, and we will, if I can't get the slides up here now. Okay, there's if you talk about radio cabinet restoration with 10 people, you'll get 10 different ideas on what to do. And I think you should listen to everybody, and everybody's just like opinions. Everybody's got one, and everybody's got something they can add to this. The first time I started restoring cabinets, it was a mess. I had a little crossing and I sanded the veneer off of it. Then some of my restorations looked like I applied polyurethane with a broom. But after that, I started reading and talking to other people, and decided that this restoration was something that was a lot of fun, and I'd like to share some of these techniques with you. Here are a few that we did on one day, and we'll talk about this more in part 2. But I like to save the cabinets up and spray them on one day when the humidity and the temperature's good. So this is some of the ones that are not finished. The toning isn't done, and other things on there, but this gives you an idea what you can do. And I'll just say a little something going into part 2. One of the most important things you can have in your workshop is an air compressor, and you want to spray lacquer of all the things, and you can either do it with a little can, but an air compressor and a gun is the better way to go. So take a look at this, and I'll say that one of the first things you want to do is take a good look at the radio and decide whether you want to clean it up or whether you want to refinish it. And so these are some of the steps we'll go through. I would say one of the first things to do is take a good look at your radio, clean the cabinet up, and then decide whether or not you want to continue cleaning and polishing and maybe doing a little minor repairs with the existing finish. And again, I think most people would agree that maintaining the original finish is better than refinishing it, and unless the original finish is too far gone or has so much damage it needs to be repaired. And in many cases, repair on a radio without doing a complete refinish job will not give you the kind of results you probably want. So go over this radio with Gojo, and Gojo is a waterless hand cleaner, and I believe we have a slide here on that. If you're not familiar with it, you can get it at your automobile parts store, Walmart, or whatever. It's a white cream. Don't get the one with the pumice in it. Just get the white cream, and it will do a wonderful job for you. You can just put it on a paper towel and a rag and go over the radio, and you'll find that it takes a lot of the crud off of there. And if you're not getting it all off, and you're not happy with it, get some Quad Zero steel wool and put the Gojo on that and wipe it off. But be very careful on the edges of the radio, because you'll go through the lacquer finish or whatever the finish is on it, and you'll get right down to the wood, and you'll create a little bit of a problem that you might not have wanted. It's not the end of the world, because you can later put some wax on it, and it will give you a halfway decent job. So when I do it, I get the Gojo and I clean, say, one area of the radio, and wipe it down real good with the Gojo on the paper towels or the rag, and then go over it with the steel wool. And you can also then take a toothbrush or a credit card and get down into the pieces, the areas around the trim work and things like that, and get the rest of the dirt out of there. And it will do a pretty good job, and I think you'll be happy with the Gojo. So we're cleaning the radio, and we've got it off. And also, let me just digress for a moment. When you're cleaning around the wood trim and all, and you're trying to get the stuff out of the crack, take a piece of your say an old T-shirt with the Gojo on it, put a screwdriver, flat blade behind it, and wipe it along there. But real easy pressure. That'll take care of the stuff down in the area where the molding meets the edge of the wood. After your Gojo's finished, you want to put it aside and let it dry. I used to say 24 hours. It's got lanolin in it, and it will evaporate, and then you'll see what you've got. Couple of things you can do at that point. I have a friend named Bob Slagle in Durango, Colorado, and he has something called Slagle sauce, which you'll see here. It's gum turpentine and linseed oil. And you can put it on and see if you like that. It's got a rather strong smell, but it'll go away. And that'll clean it up and do a pretty good job. But I think I like the Howard Restore finish best. It's got beeswax in it and a polish, and it'll work very good. I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with that. And here's some of the nice slides that Tom prepared. And you can see there's also something called Mohawk Amalgamator. I've only used it once. And if you have a radio, say the cabinet, and you have a spot on the cabinet where the finish is gone, you can apply Amalgamator and you can rub that finish. And what you're doing is you're taking the existing finish and you're spreading it over the damaged place. You're sort of using what you've got and putting it over. I've used it once or twice and got pretty good results on it, but not always. So there's a lot of products out there, and I'm sure you'll find something you like, but I like that Howard's Restore finish a lot. Now, if you have some scratches in the cabinet, a lot of people use the Old English scratch remover we just saw in there, and you can apply that into the scratch and wipe it down. Other times, when I've had pretty good results with, I've gotten, if I have a walnut cabinet, I'll get a walnut stain and put a little bit on a rag and wipe it in there, and then wipe that down a couple times. And sometimes that stain will fill in that crack, that scratch, and you'll be in pretty good shape. Regardless, follow the directions of whatever you're doing, like the Restore finish. Now, if you've got the finish where you like it and you want to do something to make it shine, the next step is to put a wax on it. On the next page, we'll see some of these various waxes. I like this antique wax. It comes in a blue can, and it's a real high quality wax. There's another one, I think it's called Classic, that I didn't have a slide on. And you can get these in woodworking stores. This one little can of wax costs about $30, but it sure is good. And Brie wax is another one. And again, follow the directions on these things. The Brie wax over on the right-hand side there, we're showing one that's clear, but it also comes in walnut. And that also helps the finish. I mean, if there's some areas where it's really not quite like you like it, that Brie wax, colored Brie wax with the walnut will go in there. The antique wax on the left, again, is one of my favorites. And sometimes people use, I think, McGuire's, which is a car polish. And the only problem I had with that is it will get the residue down in the area we're talking about between the trim and the finish. So I've tried it, but because of the cleanup I've had afterwards, it didn't give me the kind of results that I liked when I had dealt with some of the others that I've already used. There's a thing here called Wood Medic, and basically it's excuse me a minute here. It is a amount of graining powder. It's pigment, and you mix it up and you can put it on there. I haven't seen that in years, but if you want to put grain back in a piece of wood that's maybe damaged, this will be more in part 2. You can get a graining pen, but we're going to cover that in part 2, so we won't belabor that point right now. So we have tried to clean the radio up. We've looked at it and we decided, hey, I think I really need to refinish this radio. So what we're going to do now is we're going to strip the radio. And one of the very first things you want to do if you want to get this radio back close to normal is you want to take some good pictures of it. You can't take too many of it. take the pictures and show the areas where the trim around the bottom, maybe a little toning lacquer up around the top or around the dial or something. Get some good pictures, and then you'll know what you want to do when you start it. So after you've done that, taken the pictures, remove the chassis, speaker, especially the grill cloth, the escutcheon, everything, and get all the dirt out of the inside of the cabinet. And like again, I said, an air compressor is a really, really big help. It'll help you clean everything up, including the chassis and whatever. We're not going to do any gluing at all. Right now, what we're going to do is we're going to strip the radio. If you got loose veneer and trim that's damaged, just go ahead and strip everything. Well, the ones that I've had the best use with are kind of hard to get anymore, and they have methyl chloride in them. I think one of them was Formby's. You used to be able to buy a gallon of Formby's. Now they have other things that are available, and I have not had the best results with them, but they will work. One little thing that you got to be careful with, if you still have some of this other stuff, and if you can still get it, if you have somebody that is in a business that can get it for you, you need to be sure and wear gloves, and you need to have eye protection, because this stuff will burn the skin, and if you get it in your eyes, it's bad news. I usually use a little can to put the material in, but I found I turned the can over, so I glued the can to about a 6-inch square of plywood, so I can't turn it over and spill it on my shoes. And I use a paintbrush, about a 1-inch paintbrush, and I put it on. And generally when I put it on, say the top of the radio first, and put it on and let it work. You let it soften up the finish, and probably then you're going to, at that point, you want to remove as much of that finish as you can. So I use a plastic paint scraper or a metal paint scraper blade, and I move it with the grain and take off as much finish as I can. I put more of the stripper on. I do the same thing, again with the paintbrush, and then I put a coat of stripper on. I've got a brush, like a scrub brush, plastic handled scrub brush. And with the stripper on there, after I've removed as much as I can, I go over it with the scrub brush, and I'll take more of that out of it. Wipe it off with paper towels, and do that a couple of times, and you're going to see you're getting right down to the bare wood. And at that point, I get again the old Quad Zero steel wool and dip that in the stripper and go over it again and get as much as I can. And if you still got residue, like you know where the dial is or around the moldings, you can use your credit card, use a toothbrush in there, use the screwdriver with the flat blade on top of a piece of cloth soaked in the stripper, and you're going to get most all of that off there. The credit card works too. You can even use a dental pick if you're very, very careful, because that's going to scratch the wood. The idea is to get all that stuff off of there and get as much off of it as you can. And then you can do the sides of the radio, the front of it, or whatever, and use the same techniques. I might mention that you'll get some of these brass brushes that you can get them at, say, at Hamfest or maybe at Lowe's or Home Depot, and they're good too, because they're not going to scratch the wood like a steel brush will if you're getting down in the hard places. So you get as much of that stuff off of there as you can, and then what I like to do is I use old T-shirts. I'll put a piece of white T-shirt in that stripper, and I'll wipe off the top of that radio. And if it comes up real dirty, I do it again. I might have to go over it with the Quad Zero steel wool and wipe it down with the T-shirt. And when it comes back pretty clean, then you've actually finished up stripping your radio. And I think that you'll find that you get all of that stuff off there and you get down to the basic wood, you're going to be happy with what you see. There's a little bit more work ahead of you. And remember to take all those old towels, the paper towels you've used, the cloth, the T-shirts, even the steel wool that have the residue, and put them in a plastic bag and take them outside your shop. They're going to have to be disposed of, and they could be a fire hazard, spontaneous combustion, I suppose, or whatever, but you don't want them laying around the house. That stuff is flammable. So we've got the radio all stripped and everything, and it's time to start addressing what we're going to do with it. A lot of times you'll find, particularly on a console radio, that one that's been in the basement, that the base is going to be usually loose. At the back of a console, you have a piece of wood that's down at the floor level and goes from side to side to hold that cabinet together. Many times these are loose, so you want to separate it as much as you can and get some glue down in there. I use the tight bond that you see up here, or Elmer's woodworking glue, and get it down into there. And I'm using an X-Acto knife. I have a thin strip of metal, and I poke that down in there. I don't recommend using a piece of veneer when you're doing this, because sometimes a piece of veneer will come loose, and now you've got a little something in there that keeps whatever you're trying to glue together from holding in there real good. But get your glue in there and do that, and put your trim back on. Any of the trim that's loose, do that, and then you're ready to really get serious about that. Sometimes you have a void in the radio. You'll have a place where a seam doesn't come together despite all your efforts, or you'll have a piece that's missing. I once picked up a console radio in Arlington, Virginia. It had been on the dirt floor in a garage, and it didn't look too bad till I got it home. And when I looked at the base, I realized there was no wood underneath the finish. The termites had eaten all the wood. When I touched the finish, it was thinner than an eggshell and crumpled. So I had to fill that void in. And what I did was take some common sawdust from the shop, mix it up with wood glue till you get a consistency you can work with, and then put it in these voids. And if you have a big void, I recommend taking a couple of small nails, small little tacks, brads, whatever, and driving them in the hole. This is kind of like when the dentist puts a post in your tooth and then he fills it. This is going to hold everything in there. And go ahead and pack it in there. If it's a deep void, do it over 2 or 3 times so that it dries, because that stuff's going to take a little while to dry. Here's an example right here. This is a 1938 Zenith 9S262 cabinet. And that void in there, I could not get that thing to come together. You see at the top, you see a little piece of orange banding, and that's my pony band clamp. And that goes all the way around the cabinet, and I can crank that thing down and put a lot of pressure, and even the pony couldn't pull it back together. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting in some sawdust and some glue, and I'm packing that in as tight as I can, and then I'm going to clean it off as good as I can. I'm going to put pressure on it. If any of it squeezes out, I'll release the pressure and remove it, and I'll let that dry. Now, one of the things you do not want to do is that stuff is not going to take a stain. So you do not want that up to the very top of your void or your crack. You're going to put plastic wood in there, because that you can sand, and that will take your stain and you'll never see it. But this method of the sawdust and the woodworking glue will be very good, and it'll give you a very good, strong joint, or it'll fill in a void that otherwise would be difficult to deal with. Sometimes, and we'll get into this later, you can cut a piece of wood and put in that void, depending on what it looks like, and then use filler around that. I like the plastic wood, and also like a couple of other products that you can put in there. Some of them, most all of these will take stain. Some of them already come in tinted, and there's one called Wonder Fill that works good. You can use the natural finish and then stain it with your stain, or you can use some that already has walnut, mahogany, or oak, whatever your cabinet is. These are things that are very common. And if your plastic wood gets hard in the can, which it often will, get a little can of acetone, and you can put that in the can, and you can resurrect that plastic wood to any consistency you want. If it's a little too thick and you want to get it in a void, and you want to make it a little runnier, you can make it runnier and put it in the void, and that's the stuff you can sand and stain. And there's the plastic wood, and there's the Wonder Fill. Tom did a wonderful job on these slides. I hope you all appreciate the work that he put in it. One of the other things that we're going to be dealing with when you work on these things is clamps. You can never have too many clamps. You can see right there. This is an Atwater Kent console that I did, and you see the pipe clamp on there. You can buy those red pieces and buy as much pipe, threaded pipe as you want, and you can use couplings. You can make that 10 feet long if you need it. And they'll put a lot of pressure and pull things in. The pistol clamps, the blue ones, those are very handy and easy to use, and you see the C clamps in there. Clamps will put that radio back right where you want it, and the little small clamps are really good for the grill work. We'll look in part 2 where we do a Philco 90 grill, and you can see the various clamps that were in there. We'll talk about clamping a little bit more. The pony band clamp that I mentioned, and Tom has an example, not the one that I have, but one similar. This is a piece of a strap of a, I guess it's a, well, what it's made of, some kind of a material like nylon or something. And you can wrap this thing around your radio completely and then torque it down. Mine has a little ratchet on it. And these are great. They'll allow you to bring a console together. For example, if you have a console where the shelf that holds the chassis in the middle is loose, and you wonder how you're ever going to get it together, maybe it's loose up toward the front and the back, the little band clamp will allow you to do that. It'll put pressure all the way around that radio. And the band clamp is the one on the lower right here. These are wonderful to use when you're dealing with clamping. Now let's just say that we've already got a place that we're going to clamp, and we've got some glue, and what you want to do is you do not want to use just the jaw of the well, you can use the jaw of say a pistol clamp or something, but generally speaking, when you clamp something, you want to apply even pressure. So you're going to put a little piece of plywood or something down there on that wood, and you're going to be putting the pressure on it with the clamp, and that's going to squeeze some of the glue out and put everything in shape. But unfortunately, if you don't put something between that piece of plywood and the material you're clamping, when you get ready to take it off, it's not going to come off. It's going to be glued to your veneer, and that's what you don't want. So get a roll of wax paper. What I do, if I'm clamping something down, I'll put the wood on there and I'll clamp it, and I'll take a look and I'll take it off and wipe off any residual glue. Then I put my piece of wax paper down underneath my wood block and clamp her down good. And when I get done, I can take the clamp off and the wax paper, and then anything that I need to sand off later, I can do it. And the paper towel, a wet paper towel, will wipe off your excess glue before you do your final clamping on it. So those are kind of the basics of stripping and putting your radio back together the way it really looked, except maybe you got some missing veneer, or you got some veneer to repair, and we'll talk about that next month. So right now, I guess I'd like to say thanks so much to Tom for the slides, and if there's any questions, I'll be glad to answer.
Yeah, I got a couple of things. Joe, I've done that also, but the idea of putting in wood filler and not going all the way to the top of the wood, and then, using some other vinyl or, plastic stick to fill it in is a good idea. That was pretty smart. And I also have the clamp, the cloth clamp that and it's got a open Allen wrench nut that you can use to twist it really tight. It's a little bit different than the one you have, but those are good points.
Thanks, Rudy. That's exactly the same clamp I have with the little wrench and the ratchet, and it works very well. I also like the one that Tom found on the net.
Yeah.
Joe, I've got a question about applying the stripper. Years ago, when I first started, and you could still get the nasty stuff, part of the instruction was always to rinse or wash off the woodwork after clearing the stripper and finish, knowing that, yeah, you're going to get wood fuzz. You're going to have to maybe steel wool a bit to knock down the fuzz and watch glue joints. But the concern was that any remnant of the stripper could interfere with setup of the new finish or stains you were applying. Are the new ones, don't they need to be washed or cleaned off any after applying and taking off the old finish?
I'll tell you, a couple of times I took a cabinet over to an antique store, and he would take a console and put it in a big tray in the back, and he had a pump, and he would pump stripper on it. and he would clean it up. And then when he got done, he rinsed it with water. And I got back and I had residue you wouldn't believe on there. So I will say that when I've used my methyl chloride stripper and I have used the cloth and got it as clean as I could and got all the residual mess out of the cracks and I set it aside for a day or two, I've never had any problem ever applying the stain or the grain filler or the lacquer or the toning lacquer. So I don't think that wood and water necessarily go together. Now, if you do use that, if the instructions say do it and other people have perhaps used water, then you're going to sand the cabinet anyhow. So if you've raised some grain, you're going to take care of that if it was raised with the water rinse. But I've not found it necessary to rinse it with water. But again, like I said, 10 people, 10 opinions. So I'm not saying that's a bad idea. It's just not one that I've used or have I felt the need to do it.
Okay, thank you. Because yeah, I didn't like to have to do that wash. You know, it was an additional step, waiting for your wood to thoroughly dry again before you could start doing anything. And then, of course, you know, it always raised some grain. So, you know, I haven't done. Fortunately, haven't had to refinish a radio cabinet yet, but yeah, I was just curious because they used to say to do that. Thank you.
I have two questions. First question is, do you use a sanding sealer? Well, it's backwards, but do you guys use a sanding sealer before you start putting your finish or your top coat on it? Number one. And number two question is, when you're using that Gojo, I assume that you're using the kind that does not have pumice in it, or do you use the one that has pumice in it?
Okay, question number two. Stay tuned next month for grain filler and for sanding sealer. We're not going to talk about that today. For the other question, I always use the white Gojo, the hand cream without pumice, because you're cleaning the radio, and that pumice is also more residual grit that you don't need. What you're going to do, if you need something a little more aggressive, you're going to use the Quad Zero steel wool, and then we're talking about cleaning the cabinets now, not refinishing. So if you're just putting the Gojo on it, just use the paper towels, the cloth, and the Quad Zero steel wool and the brushes, and don't use the pumice. It's just going to make the task more difficult.
Right, and that's what I do. And the second thing is what you made mention of is I use a Scotch-Brite pad, not steel wool, because the steel wool can break off in little pieces, impregnate in there, and then you get a flash rusting, and it turns into a disaster that way.
Okay, well, thanks, Keith. I've never had that problem. I have not had any residual steel wool. Again, I'm wiping everything down with if I'm using the steel wool with the Gojo, I'm not putting the final finish on it. And that's going to all wipe off. If I'm using the steel wool when I'm stripping and I wipe it off with the cloth, I don't have any residual in there. I've never had any problem with steel wool. When the steel wool starts to get weak, I throw it away and grab another hump.
Okay.
I might comment that I have a neodymium magnet about as big as my index finger, and I just wand that over the surface to pick up all the steel wool fragments, and it works really good to do that. That's a sort of a SOP, standard operating procedure with me after using steel wool, is to just take my magic super magnet and wipe over the area, and it picks up quite a lot of stuff.
Robert, that's a good idea. I haven't done that on wood cabinet restoration, but I'll segue into one other thing. I use, so I've got a really dirty chassis, and I say if it's one I'm going to paint, I put paper tape over all the tube sockets, get the Gojo with the toothbrush, and then get the Gojo with some steel wool, and I clean that chassis till it's clean. And the magnet's a good idea there, because you don't want any steel wool getting down in anything we have an electrical connection. But I can see the utility of it if you're wanting to make sure you don't get anything on the cabinet.
Hey, Joe, What's in that Gojo that makes it clean up so well?
It has lanolin in it. It has some kind of cleaner. I don't know. You'll have to get a can and look at the ingredients. But the nice thing about Gojo is when you get done cleaning that radio, your hands are clean too. Everything's clean. So it's really great. I say Gojo is good for everything except spreading on a piece of toast.
Well, isn't that also for cleaning your hands? They use that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mechanics use that. The first time I ever met it, I worked at a service station. Mechanics used it to clean their hands. It cuts grease. It cuts everything. But it's soft. It's not going to hurt the finish, but it'll take all the dirt off the finish.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank-
Rudy, it's a waterless hand cleaner. It's made to get the grease off your hands without having a sink. But Joe, I was surprised to hear you say use a brass brush if need be. Can you describe this brush?
Well, yeah, if I had one, you can buy them. They're little brushes. They're about 6 inches long, a wooden handle, sometimes plastic. And you can buy them at probably Home Depot and Lowe's, but I know I see them at Hamfest all the time. And
You'll find different gauge wire in the brass, and of course you want the finest gauge wire in the brush. Some of them are too stiff to work well. But
The one you
And watch out for the Chinese-made ones that are used for grill cleaning, because I found that the bristles just fall right out of those, and you have brass bristles. I threw them away. I've got other stuff for the grill, and those are too coarse. But watch your quality because some of them are pretty junky.
Any other questions for Joe? If not, I'd like to thank you, Joe, for the excellent presentation. And thanks for the recognition of the slide prep that I did. And we're going to have part 2 of this presentation next month. So stay tuned for that. And if you have any questions about part 1, bring them to next month and we'll talk more about it. But it was a great presentation, Joe. I want to thank you very much. And I really appreciated all the questions we had. And so if there's no further questions for Joe, we'll turn it over to Robert Lozier, who's going to give us a presentation on the Telefunken 30. Robert has done many presentations for us in our history of ARCI video meetings, and they've all been excellent. And so let's turn over to Robert and hear about the Telefunken.
vintage radio item with little known facts or lore. The 1929 Telefunken Arcolette Type 30W for AC mains power. I acquired an example of this radio 2 months ago. It has already been repaired to make it operational, but I have yet to power it up. What I do not like is that some repairs have been done in an expedient way. I am compelled to try and correct some of them. Telefunken of Germany got its start, like Marconi in England, by providing ship-to-shore and soon worldwide communications with their colonial interests, businesses, diplomatic, and military uses. Its creation in 1903 was as a holding company to resolve patent conflicts between Adolf Slaby at the firm AEG and Ferdinand Braun at the firm Siemens & Halske. Until about 1933, all receiver manufacture was done at AEG and Siemens & Halske factories. Broadcasting begins in late October 1923, with private club radio stations approaching some 20 stations by 1925 are consolidated under the Reich Rundfunk Gesellschaft, or RGG, and creation of a network covering the nation with 29 stations by 1929, financed in part by an annual radio operator's license that in the late 1920s was equal to about $60 in 2021 dollars. These are Telefunken branded radios from 1924 to 1928. The unit panel radios called D-Zug were made in small quantities on the heels of Germany's period of hyperinflation. Only a few of the very strange-looking 3-tube Arcolette battery radios were made around 1926, the first to use RC coupling providing enough gain to drive loudspeakers. Broadcast receiver manufacturing rate increases considerably in 1927, producing some very nice TRF and Nutrien radios. The very odd-looking Telefunken 5 of 1928 becomes their very first AC-powered broadcast receiver, but production numbers were very low. By 1927, they had completely repackaged the design of the Arcolette, still battery-powered with a stage of tuned RF with regenerative feedback and 2 stages of resistance-capacitance coupled audio amplification. By 1928, they had a DC mains-powered version in the same cabinet, modified by adding a perforated cage on the back of their battery set to enclose a large ballast lamp, line chokes, and filter capacitors. Quite a toasty arrangement. Many makers wanted to assign a catchy brand name, and the last name of the Telefunken Director of Engineering, George Graf von Arco, seemed a natural to play upon. So there was, in addition to the Arcolette, the Arcophone, magnetic driver speaker, the Arcodyne, dynamic speaker, a crystal detector called Arconite, a dubious value and short-lived external grid triode called the Arcotron, and a radio record player called the Arcophar. Just a nice newspaper advertisement with visual punch, proclaiming radio with fine tuning, boasting 7.5 octaves of tone range. Telefunken, the German world market brand. This series of radios were exported. Here are advertisements in Dutch and Italian with line drawings showing appropriate loudspeakers. The diminutive Philips 2016 plain parchment cone was also available at some time with several chaotic color motifs. I kind of wish I had one of them. I have had one of the boxy, plain Jane-looking Arcophone 3 speakers shown on the right for 25 years, but never researched it. Only this past week did I learn that it has a very unusual radiating structure consisting of 2 half-cylinders of a parchment-like paper joined along one edge and attached to the pin driver mechanism. I'll certainly want to see how this sounds. So here is my newfound 30W. Certainly nothing even remotely equivalent in American-made radios of 1929 produced in any quantity at all. The large thumbwheel knobs on the front are for regeneration and tuning. Small shafts on either side of the cabinet provide friction drive for the fine adjustments. A 3-position slide switch on the front selects operating wavelengths from 200 to 2,000 meters. To operate the set, you must lift the lid and press the white button. To turn off, you push the black button. No real shock hazard here, and these 3 tubes do not get dangerously hot. The power rectifier tube is enclosed in the metal box. The silent key that had this set liked to get sets in operating condition. I was worried about how careful he might have been in making repairs. Yeah. He had rewired the set with 18-gauge vinyl insulated wire made by splitting a scrap AC line cord, aka zip cord. That would never do on any set I have. There are 100 or more pictures of this little radio on the web, but Google searches show no original wiring. I began queries to everyone I know, but after 3 weeks of search, no luck. I visit radiomuseum.org often, but they did not have my elusive pictures on their site. With the aid of Google Translate, I make queries in German and come across Radio Bastler Forum, RBF, i.e. Radio Hobbyist Forum. It is easy to join, and I had my answer in less than a day. My only comment is, if you have not used translate tools like Google Translate, is to make your sentences grammatically correct, simple, precise, short, and polite. Take the German translations and have Google Translate back into English. You may find that you need to choose a different English words to get the correct meaning. Odd that you make specific requests and people send you pictures of obvious modern plastic insulated wire. Thankfully, though, one person responded as requested. I use Photoshop to boost the color saturation as high as possible. Sometimes that will show some of the original tint in wiring. In this case, it appears that all the 5 dark colored wires are simply black rubber covered stranded wire of about 20 AWG. One wire is natural white rubber. They assembled a cable with likely waxed linen cord. Easy to replicate. These compact adjustable capacitors are common in late 20s German radios. Instead of air dielectric, they use thin sheets of phenolic impregnated paper. Not rotationally precise, but they could get away with it because dials are not calibrated. So here's the schematic. A single parallel tuned circuit with capacitive feedback for regeneration. Not a problem for city dwellers where there is only one nearby station in your native language. There is provision for a high-impedance magnetic phonograph input, 2 stages of resistance capacitive coupled amplification with a claimed fidelity of 50 to 8,000 Hz. Tube types were changed over the 2-year production cycle. You can easily see that this radio construction method bears no resemblance whatever to American practice of the times. That is why I am delighted to have it in my collection. The previous owner has used some sort of modern resin to hold the coils in place. I'd like to replace it, but I've used everything from alcohol to toluene to MEK, generic lacquer thinner, goof-off CA adhesive remover, 1,1,1-trichloroethane. Nothing has worked. I'm out of ideas as to the proper chemical key to open this resin lock, so to speak. Interesting in that the high-value resistors in these radios are almost always good, while American-made resistors of the day are almost always bad. They just snap into place. The microcapacitors have tails that snap into slots in the same type of brass strips. Unfortunately, a couple of the capacitors must have been missing, as well as one resistor. The guy replaced them with modern parts. The top lid has an instruction card glued inside. I only had a poor picture of a warped card. No font in Photoshop matched exactly, so I combined font features and modified a few characters to come very close to what was needed. I spent hours on the task, and then a Michael Rogisch in Munich comes to the rescue with this graphic that was very easy for me to replicate. The German equivalent of Underwriters Laboratories was, and is, still VDE, and for the late 1920s was more cautious for consumer electrical devices than here in the USA. You see precautions like this, where opening a lid disconnects any circuits you could touch with a standard finger probe. there had to be a fusible device inside the radio. In this case, it is a resettable thermal fuse. The brass tube has a ceramic bead with a spring-loaded brass pin with a piston-like head inside. The spring is surrounded by hard wax. If the area gets hot enough, the pin will withdraw inside the cylinder and break the line circuit. The serviceman could heat the fuse gently and push the pin back out from the other end and allow to cool until the wax hardened, thus resetting the fuse. But sometime in 1930, the safety standards were made even more stringent. You could no longer allow the user to open a door, a lid, or panel with the mains cord connected or without a key. Telefunken designed the T31W to meet these new requirements by adding a key-operated switch. The lid is locked unless the key switch is off, and it won't turn on unless the lid is closed. At the same time, the audio output power was considerably boosted by use of a pentode tube. Oh no, the ARC Zoom time is here, and I'm not finished. I thought I would have plenty of bench time by now. I can't report on how my rewiring and performance checks turned out. Maybe you guys will let me do that some other time. All right, so that's the end of the presentation. And
That was great, Robert. Thank you very much for that. And you make us sound like real slave drivers here, you know.
Yeah, well, little did I know that I couldn't get instant answers to my questions of what does the original wiring look like, and that's one of the problems with all the pictures that people post on the web is that they just show the front of the box and maybe a picture inside, but mostly, you know, people are really not interested apparently in posting pictures about the guts that actually make the thing work. So,
Hey, Robert, I got a question.
yeah.
How did you find out about that resettable fuse with all the wax and stuff?
Well, it's got a patent number on it.
Oh,
So I
I
went,
didn't think about that.
yeah, and so all I had to find was the German patent number, and there it is.
That's all you had to find, huh? Seems to me you did a lot of research.
Yeah, well, that's what makes things interesting is for me is to ask the big question, which is why does this thing exist? And a lot of times you can come up with some information that says, hey, that's pretty cool, or I didn't understand how this came to market. So that's what I try to do.
That idea about getting that Google Translate, that's a good idea too.
Yeah, it's a tool I've used for a number of years. Some languages like Russian is very, very difficult to get good, easy translations. Italian, French, and even Swedish, which are the ones that I use most, are actually work better than the German translations. But if you use that trick of taking their English to German and then taking the German and getting it translated back to English, it'll help you find to refine your question and make proper sense. So it's a great tool.
Good going. Nice
I
job.
had a couple questions on your resettable fuse. First off, it's very unique. It's very clever. The question I had is, what is the pressure on that pin that you know, if you're trying to reset it, what's the amount of force that it's pushing towards you, number one. Excuse me. And also, if you did heat it up to try to reset it, wouldn't that melt all the wax out of that thing? And then what do
No,
you,
it was sealed at the time. There was a little rubber seal in there. Now, 90 years later, you know, it's not going to work as advertised.
right?
But and this I didn't see those resettable fuses taking over the market anywhere. A lot of things changed with VDE over time, and in 2 years you saw tombstone type style radios with a back cover and a different type of actually disposable fuses used. So it's just one of those cool oddities that made it an interesting set.
Yeah, that is pretty cool.
Well, that's great, Robert. I really appreciate all the effort you put into doing that research and coming up with those very interesting slides in your presentation. And we look forward to the next follow-on.
Well, the good news is it won't take as long for me to finish up that it did here. So,
But one last question: where did you find the patent number imprinted on that device, or is it on the some kind of drawing somewhere?
no, it's just die stamped into the brass.
Okay.
Okay, any further questions for Robert? If not, we will move on here to our third and final presentation of the morning. And I'd like to introduce Larry Snyder as our next presenter, and he's going to talk about reconstructing an RCA Radiola 60. Larry has done some presentations for us before. In particular, he showed how he reconstructed a Zenith that was pretty far gone. So, Larry, I'd like to bring to the front and have you do your presentation.
So what I'm going to talk about is making a RCA Radiola 60 from my collection of parts, Radiola 60 parts. The Radiola 60 is about a 1929 era model, and they made about 135,000 of these radios. And I found that interesting because I'm going to talk about making the feet of this radio, and that comes out to be more than 500,000 feet that had to be made. So next slide. Over the years, I had collected 4 cabinets, 3 lids, 2 power supplies, and they were all beyond repair. I had gotten these given to me, or I paid $1 each at the Colorado Radio Club raffle. I repurposed one of the cabinets, and I put in a Radiola 33 chassis just to have a safe place for the Radiola 33. Previous to this one I'm going to talk about, I made a radio and gave it to my daughter in 2019. And that's written up in the flash, written there. And at that time, I made a mold of a usable foot so I could cast some feet for that radio. There were some blemishes. I'm going to start at the lid because there were blemishes on the lid of the radio that had to be fixed. You can see the distress here. The veneer on the top of the radio, there were pieces missing. And on the inside of the lid, there were pieces missing. And a piece of the trim on the right-hand side was also missing. This was all due to the water damage because there was some mold on the lid and other things of that nature. So I had to remove the old veneer. I first tried with an old steam iron, but that was effective at melting the glue, but it made a sticky mess. So I then tried a hammer and chisel approach, and I could get under it and pry it up and remove the veneer. But the best tool I found was to get a jack plane, and set the depth of cut to just get under the veneer. And that was like magic. It could just rip the old veneer off. So the first thing I did was make a block of pine, which is that white, light colored piece of wood in the upper left. And I cut a bevel on it so I didn't have too much material remaining to be removed. And then in the lower left slide, I put a pencil line around the old profile. So I knew if I got rid of that pencil line, I would have removed enough material. Well, Tom, yeah, there's supposed to be a photo there in the middle that shows I used a round file to file off the excess material, and a small jack plane to get the material off the top, and then do some final sanding. The picture in the right, it shows the final shaped. I used a mill file to get the very lowest line there to show up. And then after filling all the low spots, I used sanding sealer and put sanding sealer on there. And I had thought for a long time I was going to leave it like that, but I didn't. I applied new veneer. I used an iron on red oak. Why did I use red oak? Well, it was the only thing available at the time. So I trimmed it to size and ironed it on both the top and the bottom. I then used Mohawk sprays to get the tone right, and it ended up like the picture of the right-hand side there. This is just a view of the underside of the lid. I'm pointing, but you guys don't see my pointer. Okay, so I got the tone to match fairly good. Next was making replacement feet for this radio because I didn't have any original feet left from my parts. The original feet were 2.5-inch diameter. They were made of repwood. Now, repwood consists of, from what I read, is wood that was ground to a flour-like consistency and then mixed with an adhesive. And that was a good, it could be pressed in the very intricate shapes as opposed to actually milling those shapes by hand. They could make very intricate woodwork shapes and reproduce them. The spool has got a very coarse thread on it. And I don't know why that thread was there. Because in the old repwood piece, there were no threads. It was a smooth bore. So anyway, that's the setup on the left. That slide has a felt tip on the middle there. And that was the only part that touched the surface the radio was on. The feet, the repwood feet, never contacted the table you set the radio on. These were the parts I had in the beginning. I used most of the solid repwood pieces in the radio I gave to my daughter. So I didn't have any left. The original feet were mounted as shown here, where only the black felt portion of the foot contacted the table. I found in my parts I had the wood piece with the threads on it were both 1 5/16 in diameter and 1 inch. I think my parts were not all from the same Radiola model radio. The original Redwood foot had this flower image. Well, I call it a flower. It looked like a flower with petals around it. That image was repeated 4 times around the foot. The feet were painted black for the recessed parts, and there was spattered, looked like spattered gold paint on the raised portions. Like I said before, I had made a silicone rubber mold to reproduce these feet. And this is the drag half of the mold. The top half is not shown. I decided to make replacement feet out of wood because I consumed all my salvageable feet, and my casting materials that I used back in 2019 had solidified in the bottle. When I went to investigate getting new material, I had sticker shock. The prices were about 3 times higher than I paid 2 years earlier, and I couldn't get a reasonable delivery date. So I decided to make new ones. I wanted to see how to make a mold to make these feet. I listed 2 websites I used here. To make the wood replacement feet, I bought unfinished wood toy wheels from a hobby shop. These wheels are 2.5 inches in diameter and 3/4 inch thick with a 3/8 hole. I put it in the lathe and reduced the outside diameters to 2 1/4. But in hindsight, I could have left them the size they were. This is how I mounted the replacement foot. With I wanted to keep the same screws, so I'd go back in the same screw holes in the cabinet base. So that required a nylon bushing and a washer, and I mounted the screws like that. The foot here is free to slide up and down on the bushing. To make the wood feet, I didn't know if I could make anything that I would like. So I cut a 2 1/4 inch piece out of plywood, and this is the test foot. I was cutting grooves with the drum from a hole saw, and here I'm cutting the biggest arc, the biggest pedal, so to speak. Yeah, the whole saw picture is missing from this slide too. First, there was a 1 1/4 inch, which was the biggest one. This shows the wood part mounted in my lathe on the tool post, lined up on center. And we'll go through a series of the next diameters. This is with the 7/8 cutter cutting the middle pedals. And I'm using that picture shows the drill cutting the very center hole. Actually, this shows the end mill. I tried to drill, but the drill deflected. So I had to change it to an end mill because the end mill was stronger. Now there's the end mill. To get rid of all the burrs and the rough edges, I mounted the wood in the drill press just to spin it and allow me to sand the edges. This is a picture of it mounted on the feet. I had applied sanding sealer to the wood and then sprayed it with brown toner. And it got a couple coats of clear gloss wood lacquer. That's a view of the 4 feet mounted on the radio. On this base, the bottom of this base here, The original light veneer sheet on it was also water damaged. That sheet was very thin. It was about the 32nd of an inch thick, and I did not replace it. This shows the feet on the restored cabinet. Getting back to this gold plate, the gold paint feature. I looked at the black and white photos in the RCA service manuals, and it did not really depict two-tone feet, although everywhere you go on the internet, the feet are gold and black. So I figured if the next owner wanted gold on those gold on those feet, he could paint it on himself. Next, I'm fixing up the toner section and the power supply. This is a view. It's the two sections are mounted in my cradle. What I was impressed with this is that all the components on the inside in this view were pristine. They were clean, shiny. They looked like new, and they were in the exact position as shown in the RCA service manuals. The only thing that I had a problem in this, I can't point, in the tuner section, in the cable going over to the power section, the mice made a meal of the insulation on two of the wires. And if you look real close, you can show the mouse eating wires there. I decided I'm going to fix up those two wires, and I decided not to replace any of the under chassis components and leave this just as an historical example of what the radio would have looked like. Now, if I was to turn that picture over, you'd see that the terminal strip is severely corroded, and some of the screws in the terminal were so badly rusted in, the previous owner cut the wires and resoldered the wires on top of the screws. So I'm working on getting that terminal strip to look closer. I'm bending a couple more terminal metal strips to fit in there. So, and I'm going to reconnect the wires in the proper sequence. The earlier Radiola 60 that I gave to my daughter, I went in and replaced all the filter capacitors and got that whole radio to work. But I don't know, I just was so impressed by the cleanliness of this radio. I had to alter its appearance on in this view. My connection is unstable. I have some Radiola 60 parts remaining. I have a cabinet and a base. The cabinet is got some, well, it tore away from the base, so it's got some issues with its mounting. I've got a full set of escutcheons. No power supply remains, no knobs, but I do have the asbestos pads that go under the power supply. I have two of them. Okay. I think this is the end.
That's the end.
Yep.
So that's great. Larry, it was an excellent presentation under the duress of not being able to show your PowerPoint from your end, but we were very creative and resourceful, and we got it done. So thanks for that presentation.
Thank you.
Good job. And I didn't understand at the end if those extra parts you're trying to get rid of them, or whether you're looking for more parts to build yet another Radiola 60.
Well, I don't think I'd ever attempt another one because I don't think I have enough parts. And yeah, if somebody wanted those parts, I'd let them go.
Okay, well, we can talk about that in the items wanted, items for sale section of our meeting, but.
Hey, Larry. Larry,
Yes,
this is Keith. I just wanted to say, thank you for a great presentation. And I love what you did with the lathe there, which actually gave me a couple of great ideas for a project I have doing basically the same thing. But I love the way you did that. So it just caught my fancy. So I'm going to look into that.
well, thank you, Keith. I originally started trying to make those pedals holding the foot under the drill press. And since the load is so far off center, I couldn't fixture it well enough
Yeah.
on the drill press. So that's why I went to the lathe, mounting it in the cross slide.
Yeah. And that, I never even thought about mounting the cross slide, but yeah, that's just a great idea. I like the idea.
Thank you.
Hey, Larry, I got a question.
Yeah.
The idea of using a jack plane to pull up the veneer, that was a super idea. I never thought of that.
Well, it was frustrating because peeling it up with a hammer and chisel and putty knife, that was difficult and sliver prone.
Yeah, I mean, you set the depth of the blade to the same width of the veneer, and it just comes right up, huh?
Yeah, because the jack's sitting on top of the veneer.
Yeah.
So you set the blade deep and it was magic.
Yeah, that was cool.
It would have been nice to be able to save that veneer for another project down the road, what was left of it. Because it's, old grain. It's a nice tight grain, but unfortunately, it is what it is.
The comment on the veneer that I used the bandit veneer with the iron on, and I would never do that again. I would go get veneer from a place like Real Wood Company and just apply my own glue and glue it on. Like you point out, I didn't like the wide grain structure of that material, and it didn't really iron on smoothly. So
Did that go in strips, Larry? Was that in strips of a veneer?
yes,
So yeah, because I redid a stereo cabinet, and I used mahogany veneer, but a whole sheet of it was like 14 inches wide. So it came in a big, huge roll. So I think that was a better way. I think using your own glue is a better way to do it.
yeah. These strips, I think, were about 12 inches or just a little under 12 inches. It was just wide enough to do it without piecing together strips. So, but I wouldn't use the glue on, the iron on again. I'd use my own glue.
Yeah, it's good for edges, but not for a whole top.
Yeah.
All right, any other questions for Larry? If not, that will conclude our presentation section for today. And at this point, I always like to have Matt put up the poll, which asks all of you out there whether you would like to give a presentation in the future. And we encourage you to do so. It's what keeps this meeting interesting, is to have presenters show up. And we've had a lot of guys, once they do it, they're hooked, and they keep coming back with presentations. And it's, you can become a presenter very easily. Just send us an email, tell us what you want to do, and we'll go from there. If you want, you can just start with a show and tell and see how easy that is to do, and then do a show and tell or two, and then you'll be ready to do a presentation. With that, I will close the moderated session by just saying that now is the open session.